Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine, and not just in Ukraine, for the 7th of December of 2023. Today we have lots of very interesting updates and details from the situation on the ground. We have already discussed a lot of updates from United States of America, from NATO, from Europe, but before we start discussing the situation in Ukraine, I would like to share with you with my opinion, and we are going to discuss the visit of the President of Iran, Raisi, of Russian Federation. As you know, today the leader of Iran, the president of Iran, visited Moscow. He had a meeting with Putin. As you can see, he was met in the Russian airport. Of course, when talking about this picture, this is not the same how the Russian president Vladimir Putin was met yesterday in the United Arab Emirates, but anyway, we also see respect to Iranian leader, and we see that relations between Russia and Iran not just good, but they are strategical ones. So I believe that the president of Iran and the president of Russian Federation talk a lot, and after the meeting there was a short list of notes about the topics they discussed. Also, of course, they were talking about trade turnover as usually. They were talking about the Gaza situation. They were talking about the complicated situation in the world. But if you ask my opinion, the most important update that we received today from that event is the signing of a free trade agreement between the Eurasian Economic Union and Iran at the end of December of 2023. This will, according to these presidents, will create additional opportunities for expanding cooperation. So what are they talking about? If you take a look at this map, I have already, we have discussed this yesterday, I have already added the color of Collective Security Treaty Organization. It's Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Belarus, and Armenia, and the Eurasian Economic Union is almost the same. There are a little bit different in countries like Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. These two countries are not a part of that union, but Uzbekistan is the part. So almost the same story. And if we take a look at this map, and if we, let's say, include Iran to this Eurasian Economical Union, let's add some, let's say, polygon and map. So let's say that this country is going to become a part of this union. Then this means that currently Russia and Iran have split the entire world in two parts. So this is going to be a border between Arctic Ocean and Indian Ocean, from the north of Russia to the south of Iran. This is the wall. This is the wall between Africa, European Union, and China, India, let's say. Of course, there are possibilities to trade using sea and so on, but when talking about the ground, this is going to be the one market with one prices, with one cost, with one traffic, with one, let's say, laws, and the same methods of making things in this area from the south of Iran to the north of Russia. Of course, this is significant results, and obviously this partnership will bring significant benefits either for Iran and for Russian Federation. So let's see, the next versions of map, we will add every necessary thing like unions, like APEC, like SHOS, like BRICS. So it's going to be very fun to use this map in the very near future. Now let's start with the situation on the ground, and first we're going to talk about Kherson direction. According to the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, as a result of clashes on this area, the Ukrainians lost 65 soldiers and killed and wounded. And if we take a look at this map, we're going to see that the main updates and the main things are coming from the area between Tyaginka and Krynki. A lot of very interesting geolocations, and as you can see, according to the concentration of these geolocations, I'm not saying that all of them, all these events took place today. Probably these are collection of geolocations that were published, all of them were published today, but this is the collection geolocations that were collected maybe today, and they were uploaded to the open source in internet. And as you can see, the Russians during the previous days and today were bombing and attacking the Ukrainians heavily. So all these geolocations, as for me, tells me that the Russians took a decision to complete the Ukrainian story in Krynki area. As I understand, the Russians managed to achieve the goals and results they planned to achieve. As I understand, the Ukrainians lost significant number of forces, and as I understand, now it's time to complete this story. So why is this the best time for the Russians? You may say that the Russians managed to destroy probably battalions, maybe brigades of Ukrainians on this bank of the river. So it's better for them to continue the same situation and to destroy and kill more Ukrainian soldiers. But I must say that Now it's a very difficult and very bad political situation in Ukraine. And now there are lots of conflicts between Zaluzhny, Zelensky. The Western countries don't want to give money to Zelensky. Zelensky are planning to make mobilization, additional mobilization, total mobilization. There are talks about women on the front lines. There are no money. So for now, it's a crisis in Ukraine, political crisis in Ukraine, and just a small thing, a small wind blow can ruin entire country. And as I understand, Krinky might be this small blow of the wind. Very small. Why I'm talking like this? The thing is, if the Russians are able to complete the Krinky story and to clear this territory, and if the talks and the rumors that Ukrainians didn't have possibilities to evacuate wounded and kill soldiers from this area, obviously if the Russians are able to clear this territory, they will be able to receive access to a significant number, hundreds or even thousands of dead bodies of Ukrainian soldiers on this bank of the river. And obviously the Russians will share this information with Ukrainians, and this is going to be something like another social explosion and social disaster. And if the Russians can find the proper time when to use this Krinky case and to show the real information to the Ukrainians about the meat grinder in this area, this can change the entire political situation in Ukraine as well. And the Ukrainians understand this, and this is maybe the second reason why the Ukrainians still try to hold this territory and why they're not giving back, because they just can't. They understand what the Russians are able to do and how the Russians can use this case against Zelensky and against the current Ukrainian power. So this is the situation in this area, and obviously soon we're going to receive more updates and more, let's say, events from this territory and based on this territory. Now we're moving to Zaporizhzhia direction, and the Russians are saying that as a result of clashes on this direction, the Russians managed to repel attacks of 33rd Mechanized Brigade in the vicinity of Robotina, and the total losses of Ukrainians were around 60 soldiers. The most important things are coming from Robotina, from the western part of this village, as you can see, and based on the Russians, they managed to capture Leopard 2A4. This is not the newest model of this type of weapon, obviously, but this is not a media loss of the Ukrainian side, and not just the Ukrainians, but the Western countries as well. The Russians managed to capture this tank and to evacuate, and as the Bradleys we discussed a few days ago, I don't think that this Leopard will change the Russian technologies or will make like significant impact in the Russian understanding of the warfare, but this is just not a media victory, as I understand. Another video we got from the southern part, from this area, the Ukrainians published the video how they were following and tracking the Russian armored vehicle who was moving to the south, and then at some point, as a result of some strike, or maybe this machine got on minefield, I don't understand, let's take maybe minefields, that armored vehicle was destroyed. So we are using this video just for geolocation purposes. The tank Leopard was captured a little bit to the north. The Bradley, or the Russian armored vehicle, was destroyed to the south. So based on these two geolocations, we can make a conclusion that as a result of clashes or Russian counteroffensive operation, the Russians managed to return control over this territory. We will update this map. Just a sec. We will update this map before the next video. At least we can color this territory into gray zone. Obviously, we will not like make a mistake if we change the color to the gray zone, and we need to push the Ukrainians, move the Ukrainians front lines closer to Robotina. Now we are moving to the south, Donetsk direction, and we also got lots of updates from these territories. You can see based on the number of geolocations, the most important events took place in the vicinity of Novomikhailivka. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes on the south Donetsk direction, the Ukrainians lost 160 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system M777 howitzer. So probably this is the howitzer, M77 howitzer, that was destroyed as a result of Lancet strike. A little bit to the north, the Russians discard another some position of something. I marked this icon as artillery system, but from this angle it's very difficult to understand. Maybe that was a tank, or like howitzer, like Bogdana or at Caesar, who knows. But as a result of another strike or counter-artillery duel, that armored vehicle also was destroyed. When talking about Novomikhailivka itself, the Russians still haven't launched any ground operation in this area. There are still just bombardments of this territory using FA-500, but the most important that after a few weeks of operational pause in this direction, after the Russians finished the first phase of offensive operation, when the Russians was a little bit, The Russians weren't defeated, but they were forced to spill a lot of blood before they were able to receive some results. They needed some time to restore their forces, and as I understand, they complete this regrouping. If we increase the number of days since the beginning of December, we're going to see the significant number of geolocations from this territory, not just to Novomikhailivka, also to the north, to the south, to the west. So obviously the Russians are getting ready before the next wave of attack inside the village, inside of the ruins, or those that left from this small village. Now we're moving to Avdiivka, Donetsk direction. We got a lot of updates. According to the Russians, as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 175 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles, and 6 artillery systems. Very interesting report from the Ministry of Defense, and the most important piece of information is that the level of losses on Donetsk direction, probably for the first time since the creation of this configuration of the front line, is not on the first place. Donetsk always was the front line where we could find the heaviest losses from the Ukrainian side. But today Donetsk is on the second position. The first area of the heaviest losses is Liman. According to information we have, the Ukrainians lost 280 soldiers on Liman direction. But let's first talk about Avdiivka. We got another video from 110th Brigade, and to tell the truth, I got tired to count the number of videos from 110th Brigade from Avdiivka area since the beginning of Russian offensive operation. On this video, these soldiers were talking about the difficult situation and were they were demanding to make rotation and to replace them with other soldiers, because they've been on the front line for the previous 3 weeks, and if they told if the military authorities of Ukraine would not replace them, they would go to Kiev and they will punish Zaluzhny and Zelensky. But this is not the most important event. The most important updates are coming from the south, from 2 directions. We see the geolocations and updates from 2 areas. Let's start from the air defense base on the north, on the south of Avdiivka, on the north to Spartak. We have at least 2 geolocations, of series of FPV drone strikes, and the most important that this area is located on the hill, and the Russians tried to attack this territory for many times in the previous phases of the special military operation. Also, they were trying to do this in the 2014-15, but the Russians always were defeated, and the Ukrainians repelled every single attack in the past. And the Russians, even now, as you can see, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the industrial area. The Russians managed to improve their positions in Opытne, Vodyane. Even the Russians managed to got as close as possible to Tonenka and Severne. But we see that the Russians, for some reason, took a decision to bypass this fortification. And now it's time for this area. The Russians, as you can see, during the previous 24 hours and previous days, were bombing this territory heavily with FPV drones. So that means that soon we are going to see the ground operation. Just based on the number of geolocations of FPV drone strike, we can make a conclusion that the Russians are planning to start active ground operation very soon. And the question, why the Russians are planning to do this right now, not why they're not going to do this later, or why didn't they do this before? And the answer to this question we can find in the industrial area. According to information we have, as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and to enter the streets like Kirova and the street like this one. Kirova is this street and this is Chernova street. And according to some sources, the Russians, at least this update we got this morning, the Russians haven't managed to, at least during the morning, the Russians haven't managed to dig in deeper. They were trying to do this. Obviously, the Ukrainians during the day launched a series of counterattack, trying to force the Russians to step back. Currently, I don't know whether the Russians were able to save control over this territory or they were forced to step back. But this is not the most important. The most important is that now we understand the next Russian goal and the next Russian plans. And now, from this perspective, we see that the Russians are moving to the southern direction of Avdiivka. The Russians have already launched a series of attacks with FPV drones against the air defense base to the south. And this is something like 2 areas of Russian activity that show us, and if we add some polygons in this area, then we're going to understand the real Russian plans in this area. And based on that, we see that the main purpose of the Russian attacks on the south of this area is to establish control over the main Ukrainian fortification area in Tsarskaya Khota. This is well-fortified area with significant number of forces, and this is the key region for the Ukrainians. And if Ukrainians lose Tsarskaya Khota, then the Russians will be easily enter the southern outskirts of Avdiivka itself, and the real battle for residential area of Avdiivka is going to start. So obviously the next days we're going to see a lot of updates from this territory, mainly from Air Defense Base, from Tsarskaya Khota fortification, and from residential area that located on the west of industrial zone. When talking about the northern part of Avdiivka, there are no, let's call it like this, there are no good piece of news for the Russians. Mainly good piece of news are Ukrainians receiving from this area. We can say for 100% that the Russians don't have any control over Stepovo Berdichi. Of course, we can use a lot of geolocations, how the Russians managed to enter. We can show the footage of Russian soldiers who are hiding in the basements. But when talking about the truth, about the reality, something went wrong in this attack from the Russian side. They, during the previous few weeks, according to information we have, the Russians managed to enter this village maybe 10 times, maybe 20 times, and every single time the Russians, as a result of Ukrainian counterattack, were forced to step back to the defense, to the railways. Maybe this is exactly the active defense strategy that the Russians use all over the combat line. Like first they're attacking, let's say they're coming to the gray zone, and with these attacks they're forcing the Ukrainians to counterattack, and as soon as they see that Ukrainians start their counter-offensive operation, the Russians take decision to step back to the railways, and then along the railway they're giving a battle and fight for the Ukrainians, and along this line the Russians try to destroy the Ukrainians. Maybe this is the part of tactic. So we need to understand that when I'm saying that the Russians don't have any control over Stepovo or Petrovsk in Russian, it doesn't mean that the Russians were defeated. I'm just saying that probably the Russians use a little bit different tactics. Once again, the Russians enter the city, the Ukrainians launch counteroffensive, and when the Ukrainian comes to the city or village, the Russians pull back, they withdraw their positions back towards the railways, and along the railways they try within a distance to destroy the Ukrainian armored vehicles that moves along these the streets of this village. Maybe something like this. So, and if the Russians are using these tactics as I just described, obviously the Russians, it will take time. It will take even maybe a month when the Russians are able to clear completely everything and to establish 100% control. And as I understand, due to these facts, as I understand, Berdichi Stepovo is not the primary target for the Russians. The primary target is to continue development of Russian offensive operation from the south, let's say from the mainland in direction of Severna Stepovo Toninka and in direction of the Air Defense Base, and of course from industrial area. So the southern part is the most important area for the Russians, not the north one. It's too risky, too dangerous, and too many losses. Now we are moving further to Bakhmut, Artyomov's direction. We got also lots of updates from this territory. The most important updates are coming, of course, from Klishchevka area, and the Russians are saying that as a result of offensive operation, they managed to establish control over the northern part of the hill of the main fortification in this area of the hill, 215.7. This territory is under complete Russian control. The southern fortification that located below the road is under complete Ukrainian control. But who knows, maybe let's say that's information we got in during the day, but maybe while making this video or when you're gonna see this video in a few hours, this territory will be taken by the Russian either. But no matter the situation, the Russians support their forces with artillery rounds, with bombardments. On this video we see the heavy bombardments of Klishchevka, and according to information we have, according from the sources on the ground, the Russian soldiers in this area shared with us very important information that the Russian commanders gave an order not to save artillery rounds. They're saying that the Russians in Klishchevka Bakhmut area can use the endless number of artillery rounds. They can use how many they need, and not just how many they need. They can use artillery rounds even against single targets. And this is another important thing that I would like to discuss with you. the Russians are saying that the Ukrainians are saying that the Russians start using the artillery rounds and FPV drones massively. And the most important thing is that the Russians start using FPV drones against single target. And the same story about artillery rounds. For example, when talking about the previous phases of the special military operation, either the Russians and the Ukrainians were trying to attack the not like single targets, but the concentration of forces, at least 3-4 soldiers. This is the best target for the usage of FPV drone. For example, during evacuation, when 5 Ukrainian soldiers tried to evacuate the 5th wounded soldier, an FPV drone attacked this group of forces, and this situation can bring significant results. So that was the main, like the best solution for FPV drones. And now the Ukrainians are saying that the Russians start using FPV drones even against one soldier, which means that there are no problems with FPV drones. And the same story about the artillery rounds. Another important updates are coming from the area of Zaryanovka, Kurdyumovka, Zelenopolye. On this video we can see the first geolocated video of Akhmat Kamerton unit of Russian forces. This is Wagner forces. This is the real, maybe this is just an icon, but this is like the forces. This is the unit, X-unit of Prigozhin. On this video we see how Kamerton Akhmat special unit was bombing the Ukrainian positions. We are using this video for a few purposes, just to geolocate the presence of ex-Wagner forces, and the second thing is to correct the map, because according to that geolocation, this territory is under complete Ukraine control. We'll adjust the map before the next video. When talking about the north in direction of Bogdanovka, the Russians continue bombardment, the storming of this area, but we haven't received even a single confirmation of geolocation of any progress. Lots of updates are coming from Liman direction. As we discussed today, Liman is the area with the heaviest losses from the Ukrainian side. According to information we have, the Russians managed to penetrate the Ukrainian defense belt along the railways and to develop their positions closer to Avdiivka, and as a result of offensive operation, the Russians captured this territory. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that they managed to enter the village by the name of Veselaya and establish control over this territory. Currently, there is a clearing process, and the Russians are saying that that village was taken by the 106th Air Assault Division of Russian forces. So, if the Russians manage to establish control over Veselaya, obviously this is the game-changing situation, because from these positions the Russians will receive a gates for further offensive operation, and they will have possibility to attack Razdolovka from behind. So the entire southern Sivir direction may collapse very soon. And also we know that there are a lot of problems from the Ukrainian side about the manpower and so on. When talking about Liman area from the north, we don't have any updates, any geolocations from the Ukrainian side, but just the level of losses. When talking about Kupiansk, we have the same story. According to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, the Ukrainians lost 75 soldiers, 8 armored vehicles including 2 tanks, and 4 artillery systems. The main clashes took place in the vicinity of Yagidne and Ivanovka, and according to information we have, the Ukrainians concentrated some attack feast and managed to return control over the tree line that located between these two villages, Ivanovka and Yagidne. But to tell the truth, for now I'm not planning to change the map, because these tree lines were changing the owner. Sometimes these two lines can change the owner a few times during one day. So maybe by the time the piece of news about falling of this tree line and taken by the Ukrainians published, it was under Ukrainian control, but maybe this evening the Russians managed to return. So for now we'll keep as this. We need more evidence and more geolocations to change map, at least in this direction. We haven't received anything from Liman, Sinkovka area, just regular updates about the clashes. Interesting updates are coming from the borderline. According to information we have, the Russians intensified their artillery attacks in this area. On this video we can see how the Russians discovered the Ukrainian positions in Kazachyi Lahiri, Lopan, and as a result of artillery strikes, few Ukrainian ammo depots were destroyed, and so just regular military activity, but very intensified one. So maybe the Russians do have some plans to attack, because, for example, Polish intelligence reported that the Russians are planning to launch another attack during the winter period of time. So maybe the things that we have already seen all over the combat line in Vremivka tactical bridgehead, Zaporizhzhia, Krynki, Marinka, and Novomikhailivka, Donetsk, and many other cities is not the final situation. There are very high chances that the Russians may open the second front line. The question is where exactly the Ukrainians are the Russians are going to do this. And to end this video, I would like to discuss with you a very interesting update that we got from the Poland border. For example, on this video, we can see how the Ukrainians found a solution how to trick Polish authorities and so on. Let's wait for a little bit. The icon, this is it. On this video, we see the railway train and we see the tracks located on the railways, and the Ukrainians took a decision because of that fact that Polish drivers blockade the traffic, and the Polish drivers didn't allow the Ukrainians to cross the border. The Ukrainians took a decision to use the railways. They just start packing the trucks on the railways and to transfer from Poland to Ukraine. Obviously, this is a very smart solution. This is a tricky way. And now I want to see what Poland are going to do, because I'm trying to say that the blockade of border from the Polish drivers was not like an economical situation and not economical attempt from the Polish drivers. That was a political step, and that blockade was completely controlled by the Polish authorities. I'm sure for that for 100%. And now we're gonna see what Poland is going to do in this case. If they will keep everything as is, and if they allow the Ukrainians to do this transferring, then we can say that maybe I'm wrong. But something tells me that soon Polish authorities will cut this way of redeployment of trucks from one side to another, and then this is going to be complete evidence that Poland has received some order, probably from the Western countries, from the United States of America, to complete the story of Ukraine and not to allow Ukrainians to get any help. Because as you know, the most important thing that the Ukrainians receive from the Western countries, the FPV drones, and we see the lack of FPV drones all over the combat line. If you take a look at this map from this, let's say, zoom, you're gonna see that we got Ukrainian FPV drones, let's say, geolocations just from Bakhmut area. There is no geolocations even from Avdiivka during the previous day. So we stopped receiving any or the level of publishing of FPV drone strikes from the Ukrainian side was reduced till minimum, and the main reason of that is blockade of border. So we'll see what is going to be next, but obviously the situation is getting more and more interesting. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, check my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.